Hi, it's Steve Rode, your host. This episode had me sitting and pondering for a long time. On the surface, it's the story of an avoidable tragedy, a case that destroyed lives not through death, but through choices. From the outside, it feels like a waste. An innocent young woman kidnapped and terrorized. 7 young defendants throwing their futures away. Families on both sides left broken. But the truth is harder. Now, I've never lived the lives of the young adults at the center of this case. I've never grown up with poverty as a constant or violence as a language. I've never known what it's like when the strongest sense of family comes not from home, but from a street crew. For them, belonging was survival, and sometimes that belonging was stronger than doing the right thing. In my opinion, the foundation of this avoidable tragedy wasn't just violence. It was bad decisions, arrogance, and ignorance, each layered on top of the other until the outcome was inevitable. A young woman terrorized, 6 young adults locked away, families destroyed. All of it because logic was replaced with loyalty and fear. The illusion that she was involved would fall away quickly. What remained was the real tragedy, the mistakes the defendants made. Mistakes that would alter the course of their lives forever. I can't tell you what it was like to walk in their shoes, but I can tell you what the outcome was. And that outcome was wasted life. Not in the finality of death, but in the hollowing of life. A daughter scarred. 6 young men and women locked away for decades, and all of it for nothing. This isn't a story of justice. It's a story of what happens when vengeance replaces it. I need to give you the disclaimer. This episode is based on court filings, sworn testimony, public records, and verified media reporting. Nothing in this story should be taken as legal advice or commentary beyond the facts documented in the record. She stayed, and that's where this story begins. She stayed to help, and that choice would change everything. On November 14th, 2021, Cortez Blake was carjacked and beaten. Talia was with him. The record doesn't tell us why, and we don't know if they were longtime friends or new acquaintances. But what we do know is this: she didn't run. She stayed. She helped him to Detroit's Sinai Grace Hospital. It's a sprawling trauma center. She sat under fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic heavy in the air, vending machines humming in the background. Hospitals are supposed to mean safety and order and protection. And for a moment, it felt like that. But suspicion was already forming. Blake's crew believed his carjacking couldn't have been random. No. Someone had to have set him up. And because Talia was there when it happened, suspicion twisted toward her. The court record gives no evidence she was involved, no proof, no explanation beyond proximity. If there had been credible evidence, it would be in the filings and the documentation, in the hearings, in the sentencing memos. But it's not there. That evidence was never brought to light, most likely because it didn't exist. Now, I hate to apply logic to an emotional event, but I can't get past this. If Talia had been involved, why would she stay? Why would she help Blake to the hospital? That doesn't make sense. And yet, loyalty and paranoia carried more weight than logic. Talia wasn't mistaken for another woman. She was mistaken for something else. The bait. And in their world, being seen as a traitor was enough to make her the target. And here's the cruel irony. The very man she stayed to help, Cortez Blake, would later become her predator and eventually be sentenced to 198 months in federal prison for what he did to her. In her pocket was a phone, her connection to her mother, and soon it would become her last fragile defense. Every message she typed that night would be both a record and a plea. She thought she was safe under hospital lights, but safety would vanish the moment she accepted a ride home. In Detroit, the group behind the kidnapping would become known to law enforcement as 1125. Prosecutors called it a gang. On the streets, it was something more complicated. For kids who grew up without stability, 1125 was belonging. It was an identity. It was a street family that offered loyalty when institutions had nothing to give. And sometimes the pull of that belonging was stronger than doing the right thing. That loyalty also bred suspicion. Blake had been carjacked and beaten, and the crew believed someone had set him up. Because Talia was with him when it happened, their suspicion twisted towards her. Not because she looked like someone else, but because she was simply there. And the record's clear. There was never any evidence she set Blake up. No phone records, no testimony, no proof. Suspicion alone became her sentence. At the center was Cortez Blake, 23, charismatic, magnetic. Prosecutors said he was the spark that set the fire. His right hand was Nasir Lewis, 24, strategic, armed. A man whose words in group chats promised violence and whose silence in court could not undo them. Then there was Samaj Ayers, just 23. His family later described him as protective, someone who stepped in for younger cousins, a boy forced to grow up too fast. But that night, he demanded answers at gunpoint from a girl who had nothing to confess. Shatonia Kimbrough, 21, carried her own scars. Lawyers would later present proof of trauma and of her efforts at self-improvement. But on that night, she gripped a hospital crutch and used it as a weapon. Maya Green, 24, was the driver. Instead of taking Talia home, she drove her deeper into danger. Armand Williams and Karamo Turner filled out the circle, young, hardened, and swept along by loyalty and fear. All of them convinced themselves of one thing, that Talia had set them up, that she was tied to the theft of Blake's car. She wasn't. She was just there. They believed she was to blame, and when one of them offered her a ride home, she thought the night was finally over. It wasn't. Around 11 p.m., one of the group offered her a ride home from the hospital. She accepted. Why wouldn't she? It was cold, and she thought the worst of the night was already behind her. But the crew had already convinced themselves of something else, that Talia was the bait, that she had been the one that set Blake up. The suspicion followed her into the car. They turned off the main road into an empty lot on Detroit's west side. The pavement was cracked and weeds pushing through, shadows stretching too long. That's where the first beating happened. She was pulled from the car, forced to her knees, struck with a bottle, and then fists, and then boots, and chillingly, hospital crutches turned into weapons. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Her hands shook as she typed. According to Trial Exhibit 36 at 11:09 p.m., she texted, "Held hostage." Moments later, "Finna die, probably." And then, "They just beat me with a bottle." These weren't just words, they were lifelines. A daughter reaching for her mother in the dark. In the hours that followed, Talia was moved between at least 3 locations, including a house controlled by Blake, where she was kept in a back room at gunpoint. Different members of the group came in and out to hit her, question her, or just stare. Members took her phone and reviewed its contents while coordinating over social media. She had no information to give. She had never been part of it. Every blow, every accusation was built on a false belief. She was a hostage in her own city for doing good. She thought the worst part had passed, but behind closed doors, the violence was only beginning. The beatings didn't stop after the empty lot. They drove her to a house controlled by Cortez Blake. From the street, it looked ordinary, just another home on a Detroit block. Inside, it became something else. The walls carried anger. The air felt close and heavy with smoke and dread. Every sound made her flinch, doors slamming, footsteps creaking, voices colliding in accusation. She was dragged from room to room, not for privacy, but for display. Each new face stared at her like she was prey. She felt the humiliation as much as the pain, and paraded through the house as if her suffering proved their loyalty to one another. Ayers questioned her, demanding names she couldn't give. Prosecutors argued one of the co-conspirators pressed a gun to her head, his voice sharp and insistent, and Shatonia Kimbrough, just 19, dragged her across the floor and swung a hospital crutch at her body. And later in court, her lawyers would hold up program certificates and Bible study records. But that night, those same hands swung a weapon. Green drove her between locations. Instead of delivering her to safety, she delivered her deeper into fear. The driver became the accomplice. And at one point, they forced her to call her mother. She didn't explain, she didn't dare. She only said, "I love you. Please don't wait up." And here's the contradiction. Earlier that night, she had texted in panic, "Held hostage. Finna die, probably. They just beat me with a bottle." So how do we reconcile that with a calm goodbye? I don't know, the record doesn't say. Maybe she was terrified of tipping off her captors, or maybe keeping her mother calm was her last act of control. We can't know, but that contrast? Those fear in her texts against calm in her voice? It makes the moment even harder to sit with. For Talia, each slam of a door, each voice demanding answers, stripped away hope. She wasn't just trapped. She was on display, powerless to stop the cycle she had been pulled into. They could hear she didn't know. What they did next would change the rest of their lives. Eventually, even they seemed to realize she had nothing left to give. No answers, no names, just fear. So they abandoned her. It was November in Detroit, the kind of cold that slices through clothing and clings to your breath. They dropped her on the roadside, miles from where the night had begun, bruised, disoriented, and alone. She watched the car's taillights fade into darkness until they were gone. The silence pressed in heavy. No voices, no footsteps. Only the sound of her own breathing, quick and shallow. The crunch of gravel beneath her shoes, the wind scraping across empty streets. Every shadow looked like danger. Every gust of wind sounded like someone coming back. The cold gnawed at her body, but the deeper chill was knowing no one was coming to save her. Later, prosecutors would show videos pulled from their phones. One captured her curled on the floor, sobbing as a phone was ripped from her hands. And in the group chat, messages flashed. "We killin' all tonight. IDGAF. Why y'all let her record, though?" In that moment, those words were swagger. I don't give a fuck. But in court, they did. They gave enough to beg for mercy, even enough to bring their families to tears before a judge. The irony was unavoidable. The same kids who typed IDGAF, I don't give a f, later gave everything they had to avoid the law's full weight. For Talia, irony was meaningless. What mattered was the night, the cold, and the silence. Her breath clouding in the air, her heart racing as she prayed she'd live long enough to see daylight. They thought they ended it. Their phones were only getting started. In the days after the kidnapping, the group scrambled to undo what they had done. Some tried to wipe phones. Others deleted Instagram accounts, changed usernames, erased contacts. Desperation took the shape of cracked plastic and vanished handles. But it didn't matter. Investigators already had what they needed: screenshots, metadata, the victim's texts, and testimony that placed every person at every location. The digital trail lived on in servers and satellites. Every move they made that night had already been logged. The FBI, the ATF, and Detroit police pieced the night together step by step. By October 2022, indictments were filed and arrests followed. When questioned, each defendant offered a different story. Some said it wasn't their idea. Some blamed gang loyalty. Others claimed they were too high to remember. Every explanation shifted, but none could erase the truth. The illusion that Talia had played a role was gone. By then, the real tragedy was theirs: bad decisions stacked on panic. They tried to erase the night. Investigators were already stitching it back together. The case didn't explode open. It unraveled slowly, one piece of digital evidence at a time. Agents from ATF, the U.S. Marshals, and Detroit police combed through the data. Phones seized from the defendants became maps of the night. Group chats, videos, call logs, GPS tags. Every device told part of the story. Investigators used digital evidence and metadata to reconstruct the night. Screenshots matched texts. Locations matched timestamps. Block by block, minute by minute, the sequence took shape. Among the most haunting pieces were Talia's own words, preserved in Trial Exhibit 36. "They just robbed us. They just shot Tez. I'm held hostage. I finna die, probably." Typed in fear, preserved forever. I imagine the investigators sitting with those words, hardened by years of violent cases, thinking they could never be surprised again. And still, here it is. Each message a gut punch. Each one a reminder of how raw fear looks when captured in real time. And then came the video evidence. Clips from phones showed her surrounded. Voices demanding answers she didn't have. The camera never turned off, and neither did the weight of that evidence. With the map of the night complete, the knocks came before sunrise.
U.S. Marshals, open up!
On November 3rd, 2022, indictments were unsealed. 4 people were arrested immediately. Others followed. Agents stormed houses in early morning hours, doors splintering under battering rams. Families woke to shouts of "Federal agents!"
Federal agents!
As loved ones were pulled from bedrooms and led away in cuffs. For neighbors, it was just spectacle. For parents, it was devastation. All 7 faced federal kidnapping charges, violations of 18 U.S.C. 1201A1. Some were also charged with aiding and abetting. Each count carried the possibility of life in prison. The accused? Cortez Blake, 23, convicted at trial. Nasser Lewis, 24, convicted at trial. Ayers, 23, pled guilty. Green, 24, pled guilty. Shatonia Kimbrough, 21, pled guilty. Armand Williams, 22, pled guilty. Turner, 21, acquitted at trial. 6 young lives locked away. 1 walked free, but every single family carried a sentence. Shame, loss, and grief. For Talia, the arrests brought no relief. The bruises, still fresh. The memory, still raw. Justice on paper did not erase what had been done. The arrests closed one chapter, and next came the courtroom, where contradictions collided under oath. The courtroom was crowded but hushed. Families filled the benches, parents clutching tissues, siblings stiff, eyes locked on the front. Defense lawyers stacked binders of certificates and letters, each page an attempt to show that the people who terrorized Talia were more than their worst night. On the night of the kidnapping, one of the defendants in the group chat typed, "We killin' all tonight, IDGAF. I don't give a f***." In the moment, bravado. Typed to impress, to perform toughness. But in court, they did give a f***. Enough to beg for mercy, enough to hand up Bible study completions, recovery programs, family letters. The swagger of IDGAF didn't survive sentencing day. The defense leaned on youth, trauma, and reform. Families described the defendants as protective and loyal and loving. They pleaded for leniency, pointing to faith studies and self-improvement as proof of redemption. And here's something I struggle with. I've watched a lot of true crime shows over the years. The First 48 has been one of my favorites. Time after time, I've seen families grieving and calling their child a good person, even when the record shows they were part of terrible things. I've never been able to fully resolve that disconnect. This case brought it back to me. Families holding children up in high regard, while the evidence showed choices that were cruel and destructive. The prosecution countered with a sharper picture, a terrified victim, bruised and bleeding, texting her mother that she thought she was about to die. They read aloud the group's own words, the threats and the cruelty. They demanded accountability. When sentences came, silence weighed heavier than the gavel. Families wept quietly. No one clapped. No one cheered. Every victory for prosecutors felt like a loss for all. U.S. Attorney Jerome Gorgon summed it up, saying, "They kidnapped the wrong person, and they committed horrible, violent crimes." Six of the seven were convicted, 6 lives, altered permanently by a single act of vengeance. Cortez Blake, 198 months, more than 16 years. The man prosecutors called the fire at the center. Family described him as loyal and magnetic, charismatic. Prosecutors called him reckless, destructive. Loyalty misplaced became ruin. Samaj Ayers, 110 months, just over 9 years. His family wrote of a protector, a boy forced into manhood too soon. But in court, he was the one demanding answers at gunpoint. The protector became the interrogator. Shatonia Kimbrough, 96 months, 8 years. 19 years old at the time. Her lawyers presented faith studies, classes, recovery programs. But her reality that night was using a hospital crutch as a weapon. The contradiction hung in the air. Green, 96 months. The driver. Her remorse was noted, but so was her role in driving Talia deeper into fear. Nasser Lewis, convicted at trial, the sentencing is pending. Prosecutors said he was among those who interrogated Talia. His silence in court could not erase the words he once typed in swagger. Armand Williams pled guilty. Sentencing is pending. Family called him funny and loyal, but he was also the man who interrogated her. And Turner, acquitted. Free of this case, but not of his own indictments. His freedom beside their chains became another cruel irony. For some, this wasn't their first charge. For others, it was the first time in a courtroom. But for all of them, the moment they chose vengeance over truth, they became criminals. And here's the cruelest irony. Cortez Blake, the very man Talia helped that night, the one she stayed beside in the hospital, was also the one who led her torment. For that, he was sentenced to 198 months in federal prison. And for Talia, there was no press conferences, no victim impact statement, no sense of victory, just trauma. The kind that lingers long after sentencing memos are filed away. The numbers on paper told one story. The evidence that put them away told another. One that haunted everyone who saw it. The evidence told its own story, fragments typed in haste, filmed without thought, left glowing on seized phones. In a group chat, one message read, "We killin' all tonight, IDGAF." Typed as swagger, but in court it looked like shame. The same people who bragged about not caring came with binders of Bible studies and letters begging for leniency. The distance between those words and their pleas was the distance between bravado and reality. Another message read, "Why y'all let her record?" They filmed the beatings like trophies. They passed the phone, they laughed. But those same phones became the prosecutor's strongest witness. Metadata marked the times, the places, and the pauses. The very tools they used to perform cruelty became the tools that convicted them. For Talia, her phone carried a different weight. In Exhibit 36, she typed, "Held hostage. Finna die probably. They just beat me with a bottle." Each message was a lifeline, a record of fear, a signal to her mother that she was still alive in that moment. Every buzz carried both hope and despair. The defendants thought their videos proved toughness. Prosecutors said they proved guilt. Talia's messages proved something else. The raw, human will to reach out when you think it might be your last chance. Her kindness that night, her mistake, staying to help That became her sentence. And for what? The streets called them a gang, prosecutors called them conspirators, but the record reveals who they really were. Kids caught between loyalty and destruction. On the streets, they called themselves 1125, a number, a tag. To prosecutors, it was a gang. To defense lawyers, a circle of friends, bound by geography and survival. The truth was complicated. For kids who grew up without stability, 1125 gave identity. It was a belonging, a street family that promised loyalty when institutions had nothing to give. That loyalty could feel stronger than the law, stronger than right and wrong. And that's what made it so terribly dangerous. The record showed violence, indictments, chat logs filled with threats, but sentencing memos described trauma and abandonment. Kimbrough with her courses and studies, Ayers remembered as protective, even as he demanded answers at gunpoint. The contradictions were endless. Federal agents said this case proved a cycle. Violence causing more violence. The U.S. Attorney's Office called it a warning of what happens when street justice replaces the law. Detroit knew that cycle well. Retaliations, mistaken targets, innocent lives paying the price. They weren't soldiers. They weren't mob bosses. They were kids, products of a cycle of poverty, neglect, and vengeance. And on one November night, those cycles came due. Street justice didn't fix anything. It only created new victims. Now we step back to measure the full impact. Victims, the families, and a community scarred by a crime, built on a stupid mistake. The impact of that night stretched far beyond the courtroom. Let's start with Talia. She'll never get back the night she was hunted by people she thought she could trust. She'll never forget the sound of crutches striking her, the jeers of voices around her, the messages she typed to her mother as if they might be her last. Even after the bruises faded, the memories stayed. In her silence, her trust, and her fear. Then there were the defendants, young people, many scarred by abuse, by poverty, and by abandonment. Their families described them as loving and protective. Prosecutors showed their words, threats, cruelty, bravado. Both pictures were true. Both existed in the same people. Their families carried the weight too. Parents who drove to hearings, siblings who wrote letters, children now asking where their fathers went. One night of vengeance broke not just one life, but dozens around it. And then the city, Detroit, already worn down by cycles of violence, it bore another scar. As the U.S. Attorney said, this case was a clear example of violence causing more violence. ATF officials called it a warning about what happens when street justice replaces the law. It was proof of what the community already knew. When systems fail, improvisations fill the gap. And those improvisations can destroy lives. This wasn't the first time. In Chicago, a 13-year-old boy was beaten to death, mistaken for a rival gang member. In Baltimore, a young man was kidnapped and killed, wrongly believed he was tied to a shooting. And in New York, a 15-year-old was dragged from a bodega and stabbed to death. His killers realizing too late they had the wrong person. Different cities, same tragedy, mistaken identity. Vengeance over truth. Innocence paying the price. Detroit's case became a perfect example of how quickly loyalty and fear can curdle into tragedy. 7 charged, 6 convicted, 2 guilty of the original carjacking, and 1 innocent young woman who bore the weight of them all. The law handed out numbers, the community carried grief, and the city added another line to its long ledger of loss. Impact isn't the same as justice. Next, we enter the sentencing room to ask what justice really feels like when everyone loses.
All rise.
Sometimes the law gets it right, but that doesn't mean justice feels right. When Judge Lori Mickelson sentenced Cortez Blake, she didn't gloat, she didn't lecture. She simply acknowledged what everyone already knew. Nothing about this case made sense. A carjacking happened. An innocent woman was mistaken for someone else. A group of young people responded with rage instead of reason. And now, everyone was left with loss. The law can measure years, it can tally months, but it can't calculate loss. It can't weigh what was stolen from Talia. It can't measure the futures wasted behind bars. It can't reconcile how a night of vengeance became a lifetime of consequences. In the courtroom, silence hung heavy after each sentence was read. Families cried softly. Parents held each other. Even victory for prosecutors felt hollow, because the wind could not undo what had already been done and what had already been lost. You know, as I think back to where we began, I return to the same realization. The law can hand out numbers, but it can't hand out healing. Justice on paper does not feel like justice in life. If this episode left you thinking or feeling, I would be so grateful if you leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening to this podcast. It helps others discover the show and tells the platforms that these kinds of stories matter. And if you think I did a good job telling the story, I would especially appreciate a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Those reviews help more people find this podcast and bring attention to cases that often go unheard. You can also read the full court documents, see the verified evidence, or sign up for email alerts about future episodes at truecrimeunheard.com. And don't forget, if you want to dig into the official filings, the source material from this case, I've made them available on the episode page at truecrimeunheard.com. Go there to download them and see the record for yourself. That's truecrimeunheard.com. This was a hard story, not because of gore or shock, but because of what it revealed. Simple, wasted life. Not in the finality of death, but in the hollowing of life itself. Talia carries scars that will never fully fade. 6 young defendants will spend decades behind bars. Their futures gone. And families on both sides live every day with grief that doesn't show up in court records. When I think back to the beginning of this case, to what I said in the opening, I return to the same truth. Vengeance doesn't bring justice. It just multiplies the loss. It spreads it from one person to many, from one night to years. She stayed where it began. She stayed to help. And that choice became the opening scene of this tragedy. For everyone involved, it's where life as they knew it ended. Next time, I'm going to be covering a serial killer case. One that you might have heard of, but facts you might not have. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, stay subscribed. I'll see you.